Kenmore City Council is now in session. First on our agenda is a proclamation. Whereas Building Safety Month is an annual event to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown protectors of public safety, our local code officials, who assure us of safe, sustainable, efficient, and livable buildings that are essential to America's prosperity. And whereas Kenmore is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength as a city depend on the safety and economic value of the homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serves our residents, both in everyday life and in times of disaster. And whereas our confidence in the resilience of the buildings that serve our community is achieved through the devotion of diligent guardians, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, plumbers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction and maintenance of buildings. And whereas these guardians implement the highest quality codes to protect us in the buildings where we live, learn, work, and play. And whereas our nation benefits economically and technologically from using the international codes, the most widely adopted building safety and fire prevention codes in the world, developed by a national voluntary consensus organization, in part because our government is able to avoid the high costs and complexity of developing and maintaining these codes. And whereas Building Safety Month encourages us to raise awareness about the importance of safe and resilient construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, energy conservation, water safety, training the next generation, and new technologies in the construction industry. Now, therefore, I, Nigel Herbig, Mayor of the City of Kenmore, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2023 to be Building Safety Month in the City of Kenmore. We urge all residents to commit to improving building safety, resilience, and economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential service provided to all of us by local and state building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in protecting lives and property. Next up, we have a presentation, new staff introductions.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. I'm super excited to introduce our new facility and fleet maintenance supervisor tonight, and it's Aleks Firsov. He comes to us with a ton of experience in facilities, and most recently was with the St. Thomas School. So welcome, Aleks.
Thank you very much. So, Mayor Herbig, council members, thank you. I want to thank Rob Carlindsey, Jennifer Gordon, and the city as a whole for welcoming me into the community here. Over the past 2 weeks, I've really just felt welcomed by the entire community, and everyone has been so kind. They've been so nice in every way, been very helpful, and I just look forward to continuing my progress here, getting to know this, getting oriented in this new role and new position here. And as Jennifer mentioned, I come from St. Thomas School, and I have a passive prior experience in commercial institutional buildings and maintenance of facilities, and also transportation departments. So look forward to just bringing my knowledge, my skills of these areas to the city of Kenmore to help the city achieve its goals. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome. Next, we have interim volunteer and event supervisor Maurita Colbur, introduced by event specialist Nicole Suarez.
Good evening, Mayor and Deputy Mayor and council members. Thanks for joining us this evening. So it's my honor to introduce Maria Colburn. She's the interim volunteer and events supervisor, filling in for Stephanie Brown this summer. We are very lucky to have Maurita, who brings with us a wealth of experience in the volunteer and event realm. Most recently, Maurita was at the chamber, the Bothell-Kimber Chamber, as the community and member relations manager. And in that role, managed volunteers and worked on several of their events, as well as doing a lot of day-to-day relations, and has some great experience from that of community relationships, partnerships, which is very essential in this role, and also has a great wealth of experience at schools, the YMCA, also doing various volunteer management and event roles. So she's already planned an amazing first annual Earth Day event, which was a great success and much bigger than we thought it would be. So props to you for that. And then is the lead for various of our summer events this year, and is heading up our entire event and volunteer scope, of which we're very busy this summer. So appreciate her being here. If you'd like to say anything else.
Thank you, Mayor and council people. I'm super excited to be here. It was a very short jaunt from the Bothell Kenmore Chamber over here. And I've worked with some of you before with that other hat on. And I'm really excited to be a part of the team here and super excited for the summer and the events. Thank you to those of you who came to Earth Day. That was greatly appreciated. As well as what Aleks said, I felt greatly supported here. Everyone's been very friendly, very helpful. It's been very easy to plug in, hit the ground running. Stephanie Brown, who I'm temporarily replacing, has a gorgeous baby girl, and she's doing very well, and she says hello. And I'm really excited about the ribbon cutting this weekend, which again is becoming larger than we originally anticipated, which is great. And I'm hoping that the rest of the summer just continues to go as smoothly as things have so far. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Rebecca Lucero, also introduced by Nicole Suarez.
Okay, well, yes, and I also have the honor to introduce you to Rebecca Lucero, who this summer is our farmers market lead day of manager. So Rebecca has stepped into this role into a really steep learning curve because there's a lot to take in with this farmers market world that we have. So Rebecca comes to us with a really wide range of really unique and amazing background. So she has the farmers market background as working at a vendor booth, at a candle vendor at the Ballard Farmers Market. So has that perspective. Rebecca also has experience in the dance world as a dance instructor, also as a teacher, and as a farmer as well. So we're lucky to have her. And she's, just stepped in really beautifully. I also don't want to forget to mention she has a degree from Bastyr as well, and an undergrad from the University of New Mexico as well. So Rebecca will be the main person for the farmers market and is handling all vendor relations, our SNAP, EBT, all food access programs as well. So anything you'd like to say as well?
That's a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Mayor and council members. It's lovely to be here. And I have a deep desire to bring food to this city, Kenmore, as well as Seattle. Since I've moved to Seattle, I've visited every single farmer's market that they have. And now I'm realizing that they also exist in other parts of Washington too. So to be a part of this one here in Kenmore, especially at the beginning, this being year 2, I feel really honored to help get to grow it, since I have relationships with a lot of farms around Washington. I've done lots of volunteering and lots of work with various nonprofits and other programs that have brought food access to people. So food justice and food access and good, delicious food from Washington is what I'm all about. So I'm really excited to bring the knowledge I have and the networking that I have to grow this market so it can keep happening and keep getting bigger every year. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have our study session agenda. First item, fish passable culvert replacement prioritization for future surface water management capital improvement program projects. That's a mouthful. Presented by Environmental Service Director Richard Sawyer and Osborn Consulting Principal Engineer Terrell Osborn.
Your Honor, while they're setting up, I'd like to say a few words. Is that all right? The climate action plan and environmental sustainability and stewardship is your #1 goal. And so toward that end, we took a real close look at salmon habitat here in the community. And in particular, what is hindering the healthy migration and habitat of salmon and other fish here in the city. So We asked Richard and Osborn Consulting to do an assessment of the many, many culverts within the city, and many of them are barriers to fish, and do an assessment and come up with the top culverts that we think would have the most bang for the buck or impact on salmon habitat. So with that, I'll turn it over to Richard and Terrell Osborn.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yes, good evening, Mayor, City Council. We are excited to have this presentation with you all this evening. And before I get too far, I'd like to introduce Terrell Osborn. She's the principal engineer with Osborn Consultant, and she has been helping my team put this together since we started working on this back in 2021. And as Rob mentioned, we actually started, I think, spring, summer 2021, when Rob and I started having some conversations about putting together a well thought out capital improvement program to start looking at replacing culverts throughout the city that are currently posing barriers for fish passage, and in particular adult salmonid fish that could use these streams for all the many benefits that they could provide. And I also would point out too that we've had some wonderful collaboration with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We approached them, letting them know what we were doing, and they were happy to bump us up in priority and work with us over the last 2 summers, sending out biologists to update culvert assessments for us, and bounce ideas back and forth. And then several private property owners coordinating with us, letting us come out and check culverts over this time as well. So we appreciated that. And with that, I'll jump into it. So what I wanted to start with is kind of lay the groundwork on just kind of what the current culvert inventory throughout the city is, and kind of the process of putting updating our inventory and developing a nice GIS layer with all this information. And then dive into how we assess them for fish passability, and also the tool that Osborn primarily developed for us to take this information and prioritize culverts. And I'll let her get into more detail when we get to that part. And then end on just what our next steps would be, and get a little bit of direction on putting this capital program together and coming back with some more refined information later this year. So on this first slide, and at the end, if we want to if questions come up, I have these figures, full figures I can pull up. I know they're kind of small on these slides, so I'm happy to do that at the end as well. But with this first figure here, it shows all of the stream-bearing culverts throughout the city, and there are 228 individual segments. And I've got some of the data here, the total amount of feet, but what we found was they were split roughly half and half, with city-owned and privately owned, with 111 owned by the city and 117 privately owned. And one thing I wanted to point out, which becomes a little more important later on, particularly if you are looking at fish and wildlife assessments, for instance, sometimes they'll just talk about a fish barrier site, and they may group multiple culverts together. So it's not always one-to-one. When I say culverts, I'm talking about individual culverts. So some stream crossings, you might have 2 dual culverts next to each other. So that's 2 culverts in our GIS, whereas Fish and Wildlife might identify that as a fish barrier. So just keep that in mind as we're looking at these 2 numbers. And then with that, it's when we talk about culverts, there is a wide variety of arrangements that have different challenges and complexities associated with each one when we start talking about replacing them with fish passable culverts. There are, as you can look in this map, we have segments of pipe stream versus a nice, a single culvert that just goes from one side of the road to the other. So you may have commingled systems where we're using a culvert also as the stormwater system for a ditch. For instance, segments of Little Swamp Creek have stretches where it's one and the same that just runs in a ditch alongside the road. So a project, for instance, there would be much more complicated than just swapping out a culvert that goes under a driveway and it's only carrying a stream versus something like that on 80th. So just another issue to keep in mind as we're discussing this further. And this next figure looks very similar, but whereas the previous figure was just kind of showing the total culverts and city-owned versus privately owned, this figure shows culverts that have been assessed by Fish and Wildlife and or the city with Osborn's help. And you can see the distribution throughout of the different barriers. And on this, what I wanted to call to attention was I've been mentioning fish barriers, and so you'll see some data presented on here that 94 culverts were identified as barriers and 117 were unknown. Well, within the barrier assessment, it's not just black or white. There are actually different levels. So Fish and Wildlife will use increments of thirds to describe, okay, does this barrier, is it a 100% barrier? So 100% of the time, this would block the passage of fish. And again, we're primarily focused on adult salmonid species versus 33% or 67%, is it some fish could get through, but to no fish. So that's not represented here, but I do provide that information in a little bit more detail in a table that was provided in the agenda bill. Yeah.
Councilmember Baker, your microphone.
There are areas in the town where there's no sidewalks and there is a drainage area that goes under driveways. Are you considering those barriers and culverts that are city responsibility or homeowners' responsibility? Is that what you're talking about?
So if that was a identified stream,
okay,
that was going along there, and yes, then that would be included in here. So
well, it does end up in a stream, so that's why I'm asking. So
yeah, so
okay.
yeah, so we have several culverts identified on this map that fall into that category.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor File.
Thank you. Just a point of order. Could you please advise the member to not speak out of turn? Thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
Just very brief follow-up. So those open ditches that are just probably in pipes below driveways, that's not part of the system, I wouldn't think, or not part of what we're considering here. But covered with grass and just clearly a stormwater runoff or something.
Well, again, if it is a stream, it would be included. I think that in many cases, you might be surprised that something is actually a potential fish-bearing stream and not just a stormwater ditch. Again, I use Little Swamp Creek on 80th as an example. When you're traveling along 80th on the west side, I mean, there's a long stretch there that's the actual stream that's just flowing through the ditch. Blueberry Creek's another good example. So in 202nd, there's several driveways through there with some fish passage barriers that we've identified, and you can actually, they'll show up here on the map, and we'll be talking about those as well a little bit later. So again, just kind of laying the groundwork for Terrell as she kind of dives more into the tool. I was just talking about the variability that there is in the fish barrier itself. And then I just wanted to touch briefly, there's kind of a lot of factors that go into it, but primarily what we are looking at when we're assessing these culverts, as far as whether or not it's a barrier, is we're looking at, first of all, flow velocity. So, is the culvert situated in a way where during the periods of fish use is the water velocities impairing the fish's ability to utilize the culvert. Another thing is depth. Is it the way it's situated, how, what's the water within the culvert kind of doing, and so depth and velocity. And then the other one is the surface drop. So which might be kind of more visually what many of you are more familiar with. So does the culvert, is it just, we have lots of, visible ones you can see from the right of way where the water's just coming out and plummeting several feet down and preventing any kind of fish use of that culvert. So those are kind of the key things that we're looking at when we're doing these assessments. And actually I'll touch on the question of the private public too. So as I mentioned in the report, some of the culvert replacements we've done have been really driven by flooding and maintenance issues. So, we've done a few major culvert replacements in the last 10 years to address flooding issues. For instance, on 192nd with Little Swamp Creek was a constant flooding issue. 057, when it crossed over 170th, we often had multiple flooding issues every year. So we really focused on taking care of those issues. The culvert that we'll be replacing this summer is actually a maintenance issue. So it's structurally unsound and approaching the end of its lifespan. So we're replacing that one. But with this program, and Terrell will highlight on this, I don't want to take any thunder, but it's we're really shifting that lens to be proactive, and we're looking at more environmental, stream habitat, and fish passability, and not just right-of-way flooding issues. So you will see, and we're open to questions and discussion, but there are privately owned culverts on here as well, which is not something that you typically will see in a proposed capital program. So again, we'll welcome any questions or thoughts on that as well. But I just want to let you know, as we're going through these, you might see some of these culverts and think, isn't that, is that on someone's property? So yeah, that coming from this lens, we're looking at, well, what makes sense, not just is it in the right of way and causing flooding. With that, I'll go to this next slide and turn it over to Terrell to really dive more into the tool that was developed.
Yes, thank you. And before I jump into the tool, I want to acknowledge what a privilege it is to be able to work with a city and a council that is so clearly prioritizing environmental stewardship and thoughtfully planning and implementing habitat restoration. Thank you for that opportunity. So with all the great data that Richard walked through, we needed a way to prioritize which culverts would be ones to tackle first. We used an industry standard approach using triple bottom line, thinking about environment, community, and constructability. And the scoring matrix is up there for you to be able to see. And like Richard pointed out, we were very clearly focused on the environmental benefits and impacts. And just as an example, you can see that the accessible channel that was created by removing a barrier was the highest parameter weight with a score of 15. And the overall environmental score was 25. So that's where we put a lot of our focus, but we did take into account, the community benefit and constructability as well. It's a dynamic tool. And so as the city collects more data, as they address barriers, the prioritization will obviously shuffle and change. And there is a lot of data gaps. And Richard walked through all of the culverts and the sheer number of them. There's no way we have all the data collected on all of those. And there's some planning in place to collect that data. But working with the data we had was how we identified the initial culverts to recommend moving forward with or considering to move forward with.
I have a quick question on this chart here. Excuse me. And maybe I'm just being dense or something, but is one of the things maybe addressing the number of additional feet of passable fish habitat that will be opened up by a particular culvert being replaced?
Correct. So the accessible channel created
Okay.
upstream would be, so if we remove a barrier and before fish couldn't get, they could only get to that point, and then we're going to open up another 200 feet. That was what, if it was a larger number, it got a higher score.
Thank you.
That's probably a good segue into the next table too. So I'll go ahead and
This table is a summary of the initial prioritization that we did. And again, that prioritization was using the weighting that we gave it with the information that we had. And it's organized by the stream basins that you have in the city. And I'll talk to the graphic first for a quick second, just to orient you there. You guys have done significant work already, and there's been several culverts that and barriers that you've already addressed. And so those are shown in green as corrected already. 192nd is one of those that you tackled in 2017. And then the pink ones are ones in progress. So the one you're going to construct this summer that you awarded last week on 190th is shown on tributary 0056 with the pink dot up on 190th. And there's the blue ones that are already in your plan. They're already funded, they're already budgeted and accounted for, and they're in the blue dots. And an example of those is the ones on Little Swamp Creek with the relocation that Richard talked about. And that leaves the yellow stars, which is the 12 barriers that we're recommending and developed concept designs for as the next priority batch to take a look at. So then over to the table, like I said, it's organized by stream basin, and then you've got the number of projects, and you've got the total length of the stream system, and then the blocked length, and then the amount of length that would be opened if we were to tackle the projects that are in column 2, and then the remainder or the percentage of what that is for the overall system. So for example, tributary 0056, many of the barriers and the yellow stars that we're hoping to tackle are very close to the mouth of Lake Washington. So although they're important, and WashDOT's also going to be doing some work there. That's why there's some work in progress, and you've already tackled one as well in that area. But then still immediately upstream, there's still more barriers. And so that's why it's only opening 10% of that system.
Councilor Shupnick.
I think you may have just answered my question. When I first looked at this, I was trying to add up the open and the blocked, and that wasn't working. So the opened is kind of existing opened in projects that are already started. Is that right?
So if we were to tackle the tributary 0056, if we were to tackle those two that we've identified as that next round, it would open 1,307 feet more stream length on 0056.
So that's the open length is the CPT. If we were to do the CPT, okay, thank you.
And that's the 12 projects that we've moved forward and developed concept designs for.
And if I could just clarify, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So that would be the 2 projects we've identified, but also the WashDOT project. So the pink dot that we show is in progress. So we're assuming that that is also complete. So it would be all the projects. And then that linear footage of stream would open up.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, so this spreadsheet or this slide that you see in front of you really is the punchline of the presentation. It shows you the 12 projects that have come out that would have the most impact. The next slide is going to talk about next steps, but just my own observation is obviously all 12 would have an impact, but I'm looking at the percent of stream, block stream opened, and you can see the 2 with the largest percentage is the Sammamish River tributary, also called tributary 1, if I'm not mistaken, right off of the south side of the Sammamish River.
Yeah.
That opening up that culvert, and it's just one culvert, would open up 100% of the stream. And if you look at the cost sheet for that particular culvert, it's not a super high cost compared to the others. So that looks like low hanging fruit to me. And then the culverts on tributary 0057 also look like low hanging fruit as well from both a cost standpoint, if you look at the cost sheets, and also the percentage of tributary opened. So.
Councilmember Baker.
Yes. I am looking primarily at 0057. Is there a way to get a picture that you can actually blow up and see some resolution on?
Yeah, I can.
Because I'm trying to look here in my packet, and if I try to magnify it, it just gets pixelated.
Yeah, and I can zoom in if you're interested in that one. So there's tributary 057. And then to kind of further Rob's point, even before we ran this tool and you just look at the map of culverts, what's nice is that especially the really high priority ones, like this one little culvert on Sammamish tributary 01 and tributary 057, you can see, like you said, it's kind of low hanging fruit. It's kind of not a stream that we're real familiar with or look at a lot. But when you run the tool, it pops up and then you go, oh yeah, well, there's just one culvert. That makes a lot of sense why that would, when you run the tool, why that one pops up. Because I think that one is one of our really high ones priority. And then when you look at 057, you know, we have just compared to some of the other streams, very few fish barriers kind of spread out. So again, you would kind of expect 057 culverts to pop up to the top, which again, as you can see in these results, they did. So it was nice to see that. You know, there's a lot of work to do. Again, this tool isn't, I'm not trying to diminish the importance or, you know, different folks in their neighborhoods probably connect to their streams and I don't want to diminish that at all, but you know, it's just, these are just kind of looking at the facts and with the criteria that we've explained to you, you know, certain ones rise to the top. So, you know, tributary 0222, I know is Rob's backyard stream. So he was really like, well, what happened with 0222? But, you know, there are just dozens and dozens of fish barriers with private property issues, complicated issues. So we have a lot of culverts to tackle that make more sense first before those ones start rising up in priority.
Yeah, I guess I would like more resolution on this so I could get weight, you know, right down to the street level to actually see where some of the culverts are.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know that we came prepared with that level of detail. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just asking in the
Yeah.
future,
Oh.
if you could email something, that would be great.
Oh, sure. And I'm actually working on getting this layer kind of all ready in GIS, and it'll be one of the layers you can look on the city's GIS map too, and then you can zoom down to front yard. So
yeah, see, that's what I'm kind of looking for. I don't expect it tonight, certainly, and I don't expect it anytime soon. Just when you have a chance to do it, I'd love to have it.
And the concept design sheets that were included as an attachment, those are pretty zoomed in, so you can see exactly where they are. And
okay,
so
thank you.
City Manager.
Yeah, Richard mentioned 0222, if you could zoom out just a little bit. Yeah, that's an example of a tributary that is just so darn blocked that none of the culverts made the list, because if you did remove one of the culverts, there were dozens more upstream or downstream that didn't really make it as worthwhile as other culverts elsewhere in the city. So Richard mentioned I have that stream as an open channel in my backyard, and so I'm very interested in that stream. But that was an example of a stream that quite frankly was just kind of discouraging, because so much development over the years, over the decades, where they just didn't realize what they were doing when they put those streams in pipes, the impact they were having on habitat. But it would be many millions of dollars to get O222 up and functioning where it should be. And it goes under entire lengths of streets in undersized pipes. So that's an example of a tributary that just didn't make the cut because it's just so darn blocked.
Yeah, even in the golf course, it's in Culvert part of the time, it's in the open
Yep.
part of the time. Yeah, it's a mess.
I'll go back to the presentation.
Like Rob said, this is kind of the punchline, but with this data and the prioritized barriers, we developed fact sheets or one-page concepts with concept level cost for you guys to be able to take forward and think about funding and budgeting and next steps, approaching property owners, looking for grant opportunities, and these are still in draft form, but very close to being finalized and being able to, they're in your packet, but.
Yeah, so these are a slightly updated version of the capital improvement program projects that you'd find in the current surface water management CIP. And what we would propose is to continue moving forward and develop these 12 additional projects. In addition to there are 4 existing, so Little Swamp Creek is currently listed as a CIP project. I believe its design would start in 2025, 2026. So those are kind of already in the CIP. So these would be 12 additional projects that we would propose adding. And we're also working with another consultant as part of our swim fee analysis that we conduct periodically. And so we will work with that consultant to take these estimates that Osborn has come up with, and we can feed those in and come back and present a variety of options on how these projects, if we do 1 per biennium, how that might impact, if we set up to fund 100%, or we could propose 50% funding with, and then rely on finding grants. We could come up with some different options for you to consider later this year when we come back. And with that being said, the granting environment is pretty favorable right now for these types of projects. Currently, we had submitted one on a Little Swamp Creek trib on 192nd, for instance, the Bryant Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Board grant. That was a couple years ago. It made the list, but it was very low. So it's unlikely to really move anywhere, but it's also made Congresswoman Delvene's shortlist. I think it's one of 15 community project funding requests that's moved on to the Appropriations Committee. So we could potentially get funding there, but that's just, there's NOAA and Department of Ecology and Fish and Wildlife grants that are always becoming available, and being prepared like we're trying to do helps us be more competitive for those grants. So that's kind of another factor of why we're trying to get these ready.
Councilmember Kugler.
Thank you so much for presenting this today and sharing the prioritization tool. I think it's really exciting work to be embarking on. I was wondering if I could just hear more about what the coordination was with other neighboring jurisdictions. I see it as one of the factors under environment, and also where it says status of upstream barriers. Can you talk a little bit about how how you coordinated or found out information about upstream barriers, or what neighboring jurisdictions are planning to do?
I think with the jurisdiction, one example that comes to mind, and Terrell, feel free to jump in, but that could include WashDOT. So for instance, that helped the 0056 culvert score higher, knowing that, other jurisdictions such as WashDOT would be, investing in the city and removing the barriers under 522, which is a huge investment. So that we wanted to kind of include that as a factor to help those situations. And then not just jurisdictions, and we didn't show it on the map, but even private improvements. We really should have had a dot showing on the condominiums down by Log Boom Park. They did some great investments on tributary 056 to remove some barriers and did some great habitat restoration. So again, those would factors that would give those 056 culverts just a few more points over somewhere else where there was just really no coordination like that happening. And am I missing any other?
No, but the status of the upstream barrier, if it was 100% blocked barrier that was immediately upstream and was also planned for improvement, or vice versa, would be nearly impossible to ever retrofit. That could have impact to the individual scores.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is maybe kind of a fun thing is, these streams have numbers as names. And I think that we might get actually more community support if they had actual names. And I know we're all busy and everything, but I'd love to work with the tribes and the community on naming at least some of these. Elizabeth Mooney did all the legwork needed to give 0056 a name. It's Chetchaddle Creek. So hats off to Elizabeth, who's in the audience, for giving that creek a name. But I think 0057 deserves a name, 0222 and others, they need a name. And I think the community would be in more support of helping to fund these projects. They actually had names that meant something. So
whoever came up with swamp and muck, let's just not have them at the table.
But blueberry's good. I like that.
And honestly, I just see that on a sign as you're leaving Kenmore. I mean, that's why we call it Blueberry Creek, is we see a Snohomish County sign with that. But we should probably look a little further into it.
Councilor Marshall.
Thanks, everybody involved in this. This is amazing. It just stems from the story of a kid who lived on that golf course and saw a beautiful little, open air streamlet running down to Lake Washington in the 70s, growing up with that, seeing like the remnants of the old growth or second growth forest and those big stumps, remnants of the old growth. And then playing in that stream and having a good time and all that. And then in like about 1980, the woods get bulldozed, the houses get built, and the stream gets piped. And that's just to the west of, I think, the 0222 from Arrowhead that goes all the way down there, that I also spent much time in. So that's amazing to see that we're thinking about it and that we're contemplating it and trying to help it out. I mean, that it's a crucial first step. I'm so excited about it. And then I also hope long-term that we think, and this may be very long-term or insurmountable, and there are financial constraints, no doubt, but hopefully things we can pursue. Thinking about the health of the streams, like what is the proper width that it should be? What is the depth? What's the vegetation supposed to be up and above and around it or away from it? Or is there supposed to be native vegetation around it? What is the runoff control based on neighboring developments? And what is the chemical composition? All those things. I'm so excited to see our council at least thinking about long-term so that we can go after this possible bringing back of the salmon. So this is totally awesome. I love it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor File.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I am very grateful for this work. Everything we do on improving our environment, our sensitive areas, our creeks, improves the health outcomes of human beings as well as fish and amphibian. And so it's amazing as some of the work has happened over the last couple of years leading up to today. I'm even seeing a return of amphibian wildlife on 68th that used to not be noticeably there. So I'm really thrilled. Absolutely can support all this work. And I'm looking forward to the completion of the work in the future years to come. So thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right.
I think it's probably safe to say our direction would be to continue and come back later. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. All right, next up, Kenmore Municipal Code, Title 12 Updates, Round 3, presented by Engineering Director John Vicente.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sorry about that. All righty. So tonight we'll be talking about Title 12, the third visit, as you mentioned. And this presentation will conclude the discussion on the title. So into that. So last time we talked about, of course, I gave a refresher on the general changes made to the code, and we talked about chapters 12.58 through 12.70. Wireless communications in the right of way, utilities on real properties, snow routes, and the maintenance of the right of way. Of changes from our the last discussion I have, within chapter 12.55150 utility locates, I needed to add a little bit of language indicating that utilities are responsible for their locates at their expense. And also in 12.55.170 utility abandonment, I added that there is a 30-day time frame, a time limit to remove their abandoned facilities. And then I also revised some text for clarity. And those changes are shown in the attachments in blue. Again, as a reminder, the general changes that were made to the code consisted of grammatical corrections, error edits, consolidation of definitions, moved text around for more logical. It was more logical to move around, better flow. I defined terms were italicized for consistency with the rest of the KMC, and then renaming of some terms to be consistent with other documents. Tonight, I will be covering chapters 12.80, our chapter 12.80 Integrated Transportation Program, 12.85 SR 522 Access Management Program, 12.90 the Transportation Benefit District, and 12.95 Street Vacation. Chapter 12.80, the Integrated Transportation Program. This section establishes our level of service for our intersections, our arterial collector intersections, and our local roads. It also establishes the concurrency program and also provides ability to charge impact fees. What's changed in this section, within this section, we originally had an overall exemption ability for the city manager, and we had to remove those exemptions for the level of service that is controlled by the comprehensive plan. So we can't arbitrarily make exemptions to that without going through a specific process with the comp plan. And then also impact fees. KMC 20.47 has more discussion on the impact fees and actually covers what exemptions are allowed and what. So that's why we removed it from 12.80. Are there any questions?
Questions?
Great. 12.85 State Route 522 Access Management Program. This section establishes how we want to control access to and from SR 522. What has changed in this section is I added an administrative appeal process for any permit decisions. Any questions on that?
Councilmember Baker.
So we now have an appeal process.
Councilmember Baker, will you go closer to your microphone?
We now have an appeal process for 522 being a state right away that cannot be included for level of service. So we now have an appeal process, or we'll have an appeal process for that.
If I understand correctly, the appeal process is more for if a developer asks to install a driveway onto 522 and we make the decision that no, you cannot have a driveway, we give them the option to appeal administratively to me and for further review and reconsideration. But that's really what it's about. It doesn't have anything to do with level of service on the state highway.
So we still cannot include a state facility as a cause for a lower level of service.
We can still identify it as that, which is something that we do in the comp plan, but we don't, as far as I know, we don't have any authority to direct the state to change that. We can only recommend and do whatever we want to do with our within our current ability to make requests through the state.
So we cannot say that our levels of service has gone from C to F because of 522, for instance, a state facility.
So if we have data that supports that, we can say that and we can identify that, yes.
Fine.
Now, whether or not the state does anything with that is a different issue.
Yes, and over the years, we proved they won't.
Other questions?
Chapter 12.90, the Transportation Benefit District. This establishes the TBD. I had no significant changes within that section. So any questions on that chapter or that section?
Questions? My understanding is that there was a change in state law a couple of years ago that actually meant that we could fold the TBDs directly into council instead of having it be a separate entity, because we used to have to like gavel out of council, gavel into TBD and do that. If that's the case, do we need to keep this section in here, or is this also what governs the car tabs?
So I would ask the city attorney to chime in. I know it doesn't cover the car tabs. That's in a later chapter, but I'm not sure about the other question.
I will need to get back to you on that, just to make sure that if one is removed, it's not just superfluous, that we're not removing something substantive.
Yeah, of course.
So back when that law changed, you did amend the resolution to comply with the law change so that you can handle all TBD matters administratively.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Councilor Baker.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm glad to see that we're continuing to update Old King County Code to ours and clean things up. Have you got any more that you've got on your plate for the future?
In terms of cleaning up the code?
Yeah.
My next one would be just some minor changes to Title 13.
Okay,
And then after that, I'll be tackling Title 10.
thank you.
So one of the things I did want to say, I misspoke earlier. The TBD also, I believe, provides for the use of car tabs. Yeah. So we, the city attorney will get back to you, but to answer your question on that, it does include that.
Thanks.
So chapter 12.95, street vacations. This is a new section that I've added to our code. So I'm going to be going in a little bit more in depth on this one than I have on the others. This section, of course, covers the vacation of the public right-of-way. Sections 1295 or sections 1295.10 and through 0.030 really discusses the purpose of the chapter, provides definitions specific to vacations, and discusses the applicability of the chapter. And it also refers to RCW 35.79. So in general, a lot of the language in this chapter is based on what's required within the RCW. And so that's where a lot of the information came from. So 12.9540, initiation of proceedings. This establishes that a street vacation may either be initiated by the city council or by the abutting property owners. And those property owners are anybody who actually touches that portion of the right-of-way. 12.95050, that's the petition for vacation. It establishes the process for how an abutting property owner may start a vacation. And it also sets the requirement that 67% of abutting property owners are necessary to start the process for a vacation. 12.95060, this establishes City Council's ability by resolution to start a vacation. So again, it can be brought on by the City Council or by the abutting property owners. 12.95070 it establishes a requirement to provide a public hearing and public notifications for the street vacations. It's fairly well detailed on how the public notifications need to occur, and it's all spelled out in the section there. 12.95090, the objection by property owners. This allows for property owners who are adjacent to the street in question, the right-of-way in question for vacation, that they can object to the city council. It does require over 50% of the abutting property owners to force a cancellation of the vacation. And this is really more, you would see this more likely if the council initiated a vacation process. The only way you would see it with abutting property owners is if someone backed out of their petition. This also establishes how the percentage of the property owners are determined. So that 67% you saw earlier and the 50%, it's based off of the length for roads and alleys. It's based off of the length of each abutting property owner's respective land as it relates to the total length of the perimeter of the right-of-way that's being requested for vacation. And then with easements, it's based off of the square footage of land that is encumbered by the easement. So if it's running through someone's property, it's how much of that is running through their property is how the percentage is based off of. 12.95100 is the public hearing procedures, just establishes the process for how the public hearings need to be conducted as it relates to the street vacation. And then 12.95110, the criteria for granting a street vacation. This establishes this establishes what council looks at in terms of determine whether or not a street can be vacated. As listed in the section, it needs to be in the public interest, needs to not be required for future use. It needs to take into account utilities and its existing utilities. No property can be denied access to the right-of-way. And then any other issues that council deems relevant to the specific vacation request. And also this provides an allowance for the council to approve a vacation with conditions based off of needing to get the fees or the cost of the land paid. And there's a couple other things, in the best interest of the public or other things they deem necessary. 1295.120, limitations on the vacation. This essentially limits the ability to vacate a road that abuts a body of water. And that's a state requirement. 12.95130, reserve the rights of easements. This allows us to reserve rights for any existing utilities that may exist within that right-of-way that's being petitioned for vacation. And 12.95140, there was an error in my the document, so I need to renumber everything. So there is no 0.140. So once you see the final document, I'll be adjusting the numbers. 12.95150, final decision of the vacation, provides for how the council can approve a vacation or how they can take action on a vacation. They can either adopt the vacation as presented, adopt a motion to deny the vacation, or adopt conditions to the vacation. And those conditions are payment of fees or property cost, receipt of any easements that we may require on that particular right-of-way, and then any other conditions is deemed appropriate by the city council. 12.95160 is the appraisal review. This allows city staff to hire an appraisal reviewer to review the appraisal of the land that's being requested for vacation. As part of the vacation process, the property owners are required to get an appraisal for the land that they're wishing to have vacated so that we can assess what it costs. And then we are able to hire a reviewer to verify that it is a good appraisal. So very typical process that we go through with our capital projects, and we want to purchase property. It's roughly the same process. So.
Councilor Marshall.
And then what do we use the value for to estimate how much we've given up or how much the owner gets? Or
so when it comes to the purchase of public right-of-way, since it is a publicly owned facility, there has to be some payment to the city for that property, much like any other property. You just don't give it away for free. And so we have to come up with a reasonable way to say how much it's worth. And so we just use our standard appraisal process for that. And it's appraised based off of the adjacent property. So if you've got a commercial property next to it, you do an appraisal of that adjacent property, use the square footage to determine how much that particular area would be.
I apologize, I must have missed it. It's somewhere along here, the property owner is going to be paying for the vacation or some portion?
Yes, and that comes in to the next slide. So 12.95170, fees and costs. This establishes what the cost would be for a particular vacation. There is our standard application fee, which is by council resolution, our standard fee schedule. So it would be the typical review fees that we normally would charge for any kind of a permit, and then any staff or legal charges that we would need for review of any documents that are prepared. There is the cost for the appraisal review, that the application review cost is the appraisal review, and that's a direct invoice. Whatever cost us, we charge back to the property owner. And then the right-of-way cost itself, which is by appraisal. So whatever that appraisal is established at, that's what we would wind up charging all the property owners that abut the property. 12.95180, the title to vacate the street. So the RCW requires that any land that is vacated be proportioned according to the RCW. So it's established through that. 12.95190, the vesting rights. So if there are any vesting rights, they are protected. They don't go away with the vacation. 12.95200. This discusses how the revenues can be used for the vacation, and half of those revenues need to go to open space or transportation capital expenses. So that would be any kind of property acquisitions, maintenance and operations, any kind of improvements being made. And then the other half is unrestricted and can go anywhere the city desires. That is the end of 12.95. Are there any questions?
Questions? Councilor Shribnick.
Yeah, this is just real bonehead here. I'm guessing maybe I'm the only one that doesn't quite get this chapter. So can you make it a little more concrete? So can you give me an example of like when the applicant is a resident, not the city? I mean, what would that look like? Why would they do that?
I can give you a perfect example.
Okay.
Just to preface it. The main reason we added this is I have gotten a few requests for vacation, and each time I have to open up my notes to figure out what I told the last person. So I'm consistent. So as an example, say we have sidewalk, curb, gutter, everything's built, but behind that sidewalk, there's an extra 10 feet of unused land. Some property owners come back and say, hey, here is some unused land. Can I buy that from the city? And the response is, why, yes, you can buy it. Here's the process you have to go through if you wish to purchase it. Another example would be, we have some right-of-way that is unimproved. It's, for example, between 61st and I'll say 180 or 61st and 62nd on that slope, there 180, I think it's 182nd, goes down 103rd, and there's nothing there. There's no road. The property owners could petition the city to buy that if they wanted to. I don't know if anybody would, but they have that choice because it's unimproved right-of-way. Now, somebody could say, hey, we homeowners live on this dead-end road. We are tired of, city, touching our roadway, so we want to buy this cul-de-sac. Can we do that? That would be another example that someone may want to initiate this process. And the flip, of course, could be city council wanting to do the same thing. We've got some unused property. Let's vacate it. Let's see if the people, are interested in that. So.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So as a recap, why did we do this? Why are we doing this update? A lot of this section was very out of date. We needed to update it to meet with state law, our current city policies, and just general industry standards out there. We needed to add some new information. There were a lot of gaps that existed within the title. So we closed up some of those gaps. Some of the terminology was outdated and we needed to update that so we're current. And then there was some just reorganization and rephrasing to be consistent with the rest of the KMC. As an example, we italicized all of the definitions that we do that throughout the entire title or code. So just chapters discussed, again, we discussed all of the chapters within the title, 12.05 to 12.95, with 12.95 being a brand new chapter. It covered the right-of-way use, permitting regulations, and the use of city-owned property. And in general, pretty much stuck with policy level discussions during my presentations to council. There are a lot more changes that were made to Title 12, and all those changes were provided to you within your attachment. So if there's any other questions you may have relating to what I have not talked about, you can ask me that here right after the end. So what's next? May 22nd, we're looking to adopt Title 12, bring that to council for approval. Previously, I mentioned that we needed to do a follow-up ordinance on parking. Well, after further legal review, it was determined that we really don't need to. So I'm taking that off the list. And so we're just going to be coming to you for Title 12 approval on the 22nd. So any final thoughts, questions, anything that I didn't cover that you would like some additional information on?
Questions, comments? I'm not saying anything, John. I think you must have covered it pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have staff report.
Yes, so I'd like to recognize John Vicente, our engineering director, city engineer. In the cities I've worked for, updating Title 12, or that city's version of Title 12, has always been on the to-do list, but they never got to it. So this is the first city engineer I've worked with where he got to it and he's getting it done. And other chapters that need updating as well. So hats off to you, John. You're doing great work for the city. And Don too, who put a ton of work into reviewing John's changes and helping with the legal review. So this may be interpreted as kind of, I don't know, maybe boring stuff, but it's important. And so really glad that John's at the helm making this happen. So thank you.
Councilman Baker.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mr. Vicente for the way he presented this. It was interesting. It wasn't overwhelming because you broke it up into pieces. And I really appreciate your presentation. So thank you.
Also, you know, we've fared pretty well in the state legislative session. Last week, I added up the amount of sidewalk grant funding that John Vicente, our city engineer, applied for, and $9.75 million in sidewalk grant funding. And that was all John and his team taking the initiative to apply for those grants. The state legislature expanded the list to be longer than we anticipated, which captured more of our projects. So this week we'll be sending out a press release. There's some neighborhoods around here that have been asking and waiting for a long time for sidewalks. So they're gonna be really excited. We've reached out to the Morelands folks in particular. We've reached out to the school and the PTA and others to let them know, and they're just thrilled. And by the way, they did a lot of lobbying work themselves, asking the state legislature to expand the list to include them. So they were part of the team. So really excited about that. And then Saturday was such a beautiful day, wasn't it? It was amazing. First really gorgeous, amazing Saturday we've had in months. And so lots of people were out. And I got a text from a Kenmore resident she's a young mom. She lives just a few blocks away from the town square within walking distance. And here's her text. She says, "Kudos to the city. I'm at the hangar water fountains with my girls. Between the rocks and open space and water fountains and benches, there are 40 young kids playing. It's amazing." And then she has lots of little clapping hands. And then also a quote from her daughter while we were walking to the hangar. So her young daughter says, "Mom, are we some of the luckiest kids to live here?" And her mom says, "Yes. Why do you think so?" We are lucky kids because we have so much clean water and trees, and we even have salmon, and we can walk to water fountains." And then in parentheses, she says, the mom says, "Kenmore Elementary has emphasized Earth Day hard," another clap. And then she concludes by saying, "This kindergarten resident loves Kenmore." So that's all I have.
All right, before we get into council member reports and comments, there had been a discussion, or at least we know that the local, the racer, sorry, what is the name of the board exactly? Okay. Yeah, we were looking for somebody to represent the city on the Regional Crisis Response Principal Assembly. I have heard from 3 council members who have expressed interest in serving on the board, and I would propose that we name one person to the board, one person as an alternate, unless there's any objections to that. I have heard from, in no particular order, Councilmember Fowle, Councilmember Shrubnik, and Councilmember Baker. What I would like to do, unless there's any objections, is to open this up kind of like how we did the mayor and deputy mayor election. People can nominate someone and then we can vote. Whoever gets first to 4 votes would be the representative. Whoever second would get alternate. I'm open to other suggestions as to how to handle that also. But I was just trying to find a clean way to get to an answer. Any objections to going along those lines? Okay. Councilor Fowle.
I would recommend that we just look to who would like to be a primary seat and who has interest in a secondary seat. Might help limit the conversation and narrow it down.
I was under the assumption everybody was interested in serving in a primary role, but I don't know. Councilor Kukla.
Could we give each council member who is interested maybe a moment just to say why they're interested? I think that would help me.
Sure.
Maybe vote.
Sure. Why don't we start with Councilor Fowle and we will go down the dais.
Thank you. It'd be really a great honor to be considered for this role. I'm actually interested in the secondary role as an alternate. Looking at the fellow colleague I have sits a few chairs down from me. As a behavioral and social health services specialist, this is a main interest for me. I've had attended all the meetings for the grant work and working with the partners and the stakeholders, leading all the way up to attending our announcement. So a lot of behind the scenes work with a lot of regional partners and stakeholders, and didn't miss one meeting. I would be honored to be considered. Thank you.
Councilor Shrubnik.
Sure. And I'm happy to do either. Certainly happy to be principal, but could be alternate. That would be fine. I mean, my background, background is in psychology. I've been a behavioral health administrator. I was a behavioral health administrator for a couple decades and drafted the I think we don't call them white papers anymore, but when I drafted it, it was called a white paper that was on best practices in crisis response within behavioral health for King County several years ago. And it certainly included racer-like models that were being used elsewhere. So yeah, so I'm interested in that. And yeah, that's my background.
Councilor Baker.
Councilmember Baker, your microphone.
I'm going to, what were the choices?
Primary and alternate.
Beg your pardon?
Primary and alternate. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm not nominating anybody.
Are you taking yourself out of contention then?
No.
No. Okay. We were asking if you wanted to speak a little bit to your interest.
No, I don't want to speak. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will open it to nominations. Do we have any nominations for principal? Councilor Fowle?
I'm happy to recommend Councilmember Deborah Shrubnik.
All right, we have a nomination for Councilor Shrubnik. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a nomination and a second. Any further nominations? Councilor Baker?
I would like to nominate the mayor.
The mayor will kindly decline the nomination.
Pardon?
I would decline that nomination, but I appreciate it. That's very kind. Councilor Marshall?
Nominate Councilmember Fowle then as the secondary or whatever the proper term is.
Alternate?
Alternate.
I second that.
All right, do we have any further nominations? All right, we don't seem to have any. Councilmember Shubnik.
Well, I just want to make sure I understood. So Councilmember Baker, you're not interested in serving as
No,
primary
no,
or second or alternate?
I will certainly do second, the alternate, but not the primary.
Well, I'm happy to nominate you. I mean, so we can, yeah, at least.
Thank you.
Yeah, consider you.
All right, so right now we have Councilmember Shubnik nominated for primary and Councilmembers File and Baker nominated for alternate. Do we have a second for Councilmember Baker?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay. Any further nominations? Okay, seeing as we only have one person nominated to be the primary representative, I would just propose we do that by acclamation. All those in favor of Councilmember Shubnik, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Councilmember Shubnik is the primary representative then. That moves us on to the question of alternate. We have two nominees. How do we handle these things? Sorry, it's been a while since the mayor's thing and I am, yeah. Okay, well, I'm gonna go in the order they were nominated because, well, that seems the cleanest way to do this. So we'll start with Councilmember File. All those in favor of Councilmember File, please raise your hand so we can count. 1, 2, 4. There we go. Councilmember File will be the alternate. Next up is executive session pursuant to RCW. Oh, sorry, Councilmember reports and comments. I forgot that we had the rest of that to go through. Councilmember Baker, welcome back. Any reports?
No reports.
Councilmember Marshall.
Thanks to the staff again for that amazing report on the culverts. Again, it's only a first step, but I'm so excited that we're thinking about streams. And I, again, just can't help but think of that little stream that did not make it many years ago. And maybe we can do something to, try and make our streams more healthy in every complex aspect of it. Thank you all for thinking about it.
Councilmember Kugler.
Just want to share my excitement for how much we got awarded for sidewalks. I think that's incredible. So excited for John to have a full plate of work and job security. So, and also I am not going to be able to make it to the ribbon cutting ceremony on Saturday, but just want to also give kudos to the staff who are planning that ceremony, and also have overseen the work. It looks amazing. I've seen all the pictures and I look forward to going there in person soon. Thank you.
Councilmember Shubnik.
Yeah, I also want to express my kudos. Probably should have done it when they were here earlier presenting for the Culvert presentation, and just all the ways more recently where kind of systematically evaluating projects, project prioritization. And that makes my brain very happy when we have kind of systematic models for doing that. Thank you.
Councilmember File.
Thank you. I attended the Kenmore Chamber event last week. It was a really good event. It's also great to reconnect with folks. It was one of their first major events since the COVID started. And popped into the 192 for the Kenmore Chamber event today, right before our meeting. And I just want to congratulate Samantha Luick for her work anniversary. 13 years is a considerable amount of time. And I'm really happy that she was treated so beautifully and celebrated at Kenmore, and it's hard to keep good people, but here in Kenmore, we're good at it. So, but that's it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I want to echo Stanton's sentiments about the Culvert presentation today, and gratitude that our council and city are putting environmental stewardship first in this incredibly important work, and that it's such a high priority. It felt good to hear the consultant acknowledge that we're ahead of the curve when it comes to this work. So I'm quite thankful for that and looking forward to to seeing this come into fruition. I'm looking forward to the ribbon cutting at Clafoudy's on Saturday. And I had a moment that was kind of nice on Friday. Gorgeous day on Friday. I was out on the Sammamish River paddleboarding, and I was paddleboarding relatively close to sunset, heading towards the West Lake Sammamish Bridge. And I was reminded the importance of place. I saw a really sweet thing happen. A couple walked up, sat at that bench, had I don't know, it looked like soda pops, but it was clear that they went out of their way to go to this beautiful place to watch the sunset. And so just real gratitude to this city, our council and previous councils that helped form some of the beautiful spaces that we have here in this city. And we certainly have opportunity to keep going, but it warmed my heart to see that. I was like, oh, that was just really nice. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the event on Saturday. It's a long time coming and it's really exciting. And that park, the improvements there are just really breathtaking. And I think it's something that we should all be very proud of, along with Log Boom and everything else that's going on. On Saturday, I was just drinking my coffee out by the hangar and watching the kids play and watching people enjoy the space that we built not all that long ago. And it refills my my sense of purpose and why I do this, to watch people enjoying the work that we put in. It really it makes a lot of what we do worth it, to see things like that get used. Nothing else to report. So with that, we're going to go into executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I. The city council will now enter into executive session to discuss pending or potential litigation. This executive session is slated for 30 minutes. No action is expected. And it is 7:27, just for my own notes. Kenmore City Council is now adjourned.